Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
And welcome to this edition of the show. Today I'm talking again with Keith McCloskey. This will be his third time on the show. The first time he came on to talk about his book on the Dyatlov Pas, which is the first book in English to be published on the case. And I thought he did a fantastic job with that. He came back to talk about the missing lighthouse keepers. And now he has another book out on Dyatlov Pas called Journey to Dyatlov Pas, An Explanation of the Mystery. And although it does not solve the mystery, it adds a lot to it. Keith talks about his trip to Dyatlov Pas and the difficulties he found therein, and eliminates some of the theories, pulls up some information that no one else has come across so far. It's a fascinating book, and well worth picking up if you're into this mystery. Like I said, there's no die-hard explanation here, but I think he puts a lot more pieces in the puzzle than we had before. There's also an extra segment with him for Patreons only that'll go up later in the week. And if you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and it's only $3 a month for extra stuff and bonus things here and there. All right, without any further ado, here's Journey to Dyatlov Pas with Keith McCloskey. And I am here with Keith McCloskey, and we're going to be talking about your new book, Journey to Dyatlov Pas, An Explanation of the Mystery. And this is the second book you've written on Dyatlov Pas, right?
That's correct, yes.
And you actually went there.
Yes, I did, yeah. I ended up paying for it as well with something that will always remind me of my trip up there because I had to have the whole of my right knee replaced.
Oh, yeah. That seemed like a really horrible situation. You get into that in the beginning of the book on your trip there, and I can't imagine the hopelessness you must have felt sitting up there.
I didn't feel too good. I have to be honest, I was actually quite afraid because, you know, I only know a few words of Russian, and I was told if I waited on the mountain, eventually somebody would pick me up. But, you know, it's not like somebody's going to be there at 3 o'clock and will take you back. You know, basically I'm in the middle of nowhere on a mountain with at least one large bear a couple of 100 meters away in the woods, and I'm terrified of bears. And the other thing is I couldn't run. You know, I could barely walk. So I was just helpless. As I say in my book, there was a few people came by, but all the forestry workers apparently had gone north, right up into the polar Urals, and they weren't due back for a week. Because one of them probably would have taken me. They could have, you know, one of the people passing by could have radioed for help, but there was nobody there. And it was only when a group of hunters were passing by that two of them detached themselves, and they looked at my knee and said, we'll have to take you straight back. And I'll be forever grateful to them because they literally drove me from there by the memorial stone on Dead Mountain, Kholat Syakhl, all the way back to Yekaterinburg. Took us nearly 17 hours with just one stop.
Well, we'll talk. Let's talk a little bit about the trip. But before we get to that, you self-published this one, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, my current publisher wouldn't take it because he said it would interfere with sales of my first book. So, you know, I thought, well, I might as well self-publish on Amazon. It's a lot easier now to self-publish than it used to be. I mean, obviously, I'd be a lot happier if a publisher would take it, but, you know, needs must.
Yeah, that seems surprising because that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but it's still selling quite well. It's a solid seller apparently, and the thing is I wanted to expand it. You know, I don't think it clashes with my first book.
No.
What I did with the first book was try and explain what all the different, you know, what happened, what all the different theories are, and more to let the reader make up their own mind. this book describes my trip up there and introduces new evidence, if you like, that has come to light since my trip up there. So it's, in a way, it's more of a follow-on.
Now, you when you went to take this trip up there, and yeah, it's a very different book from the first one. It's not like you're repeating data at all.
Yeah.
When you went to take this trip up there, you found it was actually pretty difficult getting into Russia at this point.
Yeah, it is. It's not as easy as it was the first. The thing is, relations between Russia, and I mean, I've got absolutely no argument with the Russian people at all. That, well, like I say, two of them cut short their trip to, take me back to hospital. God bless them. But I think, relations between the Russian government, the governments of the European Union, and the USA, as it was, in 2015, relations seem to be going from bad to worse. And getting a visa was not quite as easy as it was the first time around. So, but things seem to be changed a bit now. Relations seem to be. I don't want to get into politics, but things seem to be getting slightly easier because I'm hoping possibly to go there later on this summer. So we'll see whether things have improved or not.
Now, you said the first time. Did you go to Dyatlov Pass before?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay.
We'd applied to the foreign ministry for permission to travel up there because you pass through a couple of restricted areas, and really we should have just gone. But the trouble is, the train goes up very close to these restricted areas, and I wanted to be absolutely clear that, if there was any problem with paperwork or we were asked what we were doing, that we'd say, well, we've got permission from the foreign ministry. But I've heard of other foreigners going up there and, having no problems. But the trouble is, you can say, well, I went up there, I had no problem, but then somebody else goes up there, they get stopped, and somebody says, what are you doing here? And, then the problems start.
Yeah.
And it's not really a place I would like to run into problems.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what made you decide to go up there?
Well, I don't think you can talk about the Dyatlov Pass without going there, to be honest. It was an amazing trip, notwithstanding what happened to my knee. But, just to be there and experience, to stand on the spot on the mountain where the tent was and just, imagine what it was like that night for them. We went to, we were up there for nearly 10 days, and we went and looked at the various spots where the bodies were found, had a look where the memorial rock is, which it's all relatively close to each other. You've got to be in reasonably fit shape to do it, though, because you're carrying backpacks weighing 55 pounds, 55, 60 pounds. So you've got to be, you're not climbing Mount Everest, but equally it's not a trip for somebody in a wheelchair either.
Yeah, this didn't sound like it was an easy or pleasant trip in any circumstance.
Well, in winter when they did it, obviously the Dyatlov group, it's a real test of stamina and physical fitness, and the Urals they're not steep-sided mountains; they're undulating. They're fairly, I wouldn't have said gentle either, but it wasn't so much the mountain that was the problem. It was going through the taiga, the forest. It was unbelievable. I mean, mud that went up to your thighs. You had to follow a kind of a trail with the the weight on your back. You were going under logs that had fallen, and when I say log, a log that was a tree, the width of it was as tall as you were. So you had to try and climb over the tree or go underneath it, all with thick, deep mud all around you. I had a ski pole with me, which was a lifesaver because I was using that to try and test for hard ground as I was walking along. But they were walking at a hell of a pace, so you had to keep up as well. You need, like I say, you needed to be in pretty good shape to do it. If you were out of shape, you just wouldn't keep up with it.
Yeah, so there's no easy way to just pop up there.
There is, if you've
There
got
is.
if you've got $20,000, you can
Ah.
go up in a helicopter. But well, as I say, there's a group of Russians did it. You can see their video on YouTube. They went up in a helicopter, and the helicopter dropped them off, and they stayed up there for a couple of days. They were doing a lot of mine. They had metal detectors with them. But the thing is, nearly every group that goes up there takes a metal detector, and I say it in my book. It's got to be the most heavily metal detected place in the world.
Hmm.
There's people up there scouring all the time with metal detectors, but they found the remains of an aircraft not on the dead mountain, but some distance away that had crashed years ago, an old military aircraft, but that was nothing to do with it. And I don't honestly think after nearly 60 years that there's anything to be found up there, really.
So what was it like standing there finally?
Well, really, I can't put it into words almost. Yeah, I closed my eyes when I was standing on the mountain where the tent was, and I just tried to imagine what could have made them tear their way out of the tent and go down to the tree line. It's a strange place. When I went up to the Memorial Rock, the one thing about it is there seems to be a constant wind up there as well. There's a fairly strong wind that blows down from the top of the mountain, and it goes right down. And in summer, it's not too bad, but I would imagine that would bite right through you in the winter. But it's a strange place. Well, it felt strange probably because that's where they all died, but
Right.
it's got a mysterious feeling about it. I mean, I've been to other places where people have disappeared or passed away or whatever, and I didn't quite get the same feeling. But to me, it was a kind of a holy grail to just stand there and just try and imagine what happened.
Hmm. Um, so you cover some different things in this book. As we said, it's really nothing. It doesn't cross over with your first book at all.
No.
One of the things you mentioned is the when they cut their way out of the tent. You said they're kind of like square holes rather than like panic slashing.
Well, when you look at the tent itself, where it has been, they re-erected it in the police station when they took it off the mountain, and you can see that there's square cuts to it. If you're in a blind, I mean, I've said this to a few people, if you're in a blind panic and you've got a knife and you think, well, there's something, it must have been something life-threatening to make them do it, surely you'd be slashing away at the side. I mean, I just imagine myself, say, I don't know, say there was a bear outside and the only way to get away is to slash away out of the tent. But you wouldn't think, oh, well, I'll cut a big square here, get it exactly right, so it's all nice and symmetrical. You just slash away and just to get out, wouldn't you? I would think anyway, because it implies that somebody was taking their time to do it, in a rational kind of way. But what they were doing wasn't rational. It was to make the way out of the tent like that seems to me a kind of life-threatening blind panic situation. And you can see it in the pictures. There's a cut that goes across the top and then down the side, and then it's almost as if there are other tears in it, but the main part of the center of the side of the tent seems to be just a large symmetrical cut in parts, and I find that odd. But having said that, the the first search party that arrived there, used their pickaxes to open it up. To get access into the tent. But at that point, they hadn't found any of the bodies, so they're just assuming, well, they've left the tent in a bit of a hurry, possibly an avalanche. Who knows what they were thinking? But they were assuming that they were going to find everybody alive, so they probably weren't too worried what they did to the tent.
Now, that goes along though with the footprints, which show a distinct lack of like panic or anything.
Yeah, it's well the footprints. You almost can't understand it. You think you've destroyed your place of safety where you were warm and everything was fine. You've destroyed that to get out, presumably because you're terribly frightened or something. Then you just find footsteps almost taking a leisurely stroll down the side of the mountain. But the searchers were saying, well, the footsteps went in a relatively walking, orderly line. None of them were wearing shoes or boots or skis or anything like that. Some of them were walking in either bare feet or socks on their feet, which it just doesn't make sense. And the other thing about it is the approach to where they pitched the tent. I mean, we came up that way. We were camped down in the valley. We came up that way. All the ski tracks had disappeared. So you've got the footprints on one side going down to where they were found, and those tracks are there, but the other tracks of theirs going up have disappeared, which again doesn't make a lot of sense. But you start going into other theories there of they died somewhere else. The authorities, the KGB, whoever brought them up to make it look like a staged scene. Each step of the, as you discuss the story, goes off on different tangents with different theories. But I have to say, and I was one of them at the beginning when I first came across this, that did believe that they possibly died somewhere else. And, it was a stage scene. But, having been there and having looked at various bits of evidence now that's come to light, I believe they did die there. But, it's inexplicable why they just walked down the mountainside. Why didn't they run?
Right. And again, with the cutting it out the way they did almost implies a lack of panic. But if you're not panicked, why wouldn't you just go out the main door of the tent?
Exactly. Yeah. There's some dispute. One of the search party at a Mankey stated that it was partly unbuttoned, whereas others have said that they remember it being buttoned. But you see, part of the problem also there is people's memories are starting to, we're talking about 1959. I mean, I can't even remember what I did a couple of weeks ago, but I said in the book that there's a conference every year held at the university in Yekaterinburg. There was two of the original search party members there arguing with each other about how the tent was when they found it. They were both there at exactly the same time, and they were arguing as to how it was. The one was saying it was, in a certain position, and the other one was saying no, it wasn't. So you think, well, they're both there, they both saw it. One of them's right, one of them's wrong, but which one? Or are they both wrong? They can't. People's memories play tricks on it. I think there's probably a bit of a, there's too much emphasis placed on, what a search party member said, in 1959, especially before the bodies were found. It's almost as if that's gospel and it can't be challenged. And I say the same about the autopsies, because I seriously question the validity of the autopsy reports. None of it makes any sense. But you see, part of the thing, I think, is I don't think it's meant to make any sense. You might say, well, why would the government do that? But I also mentioned what happened in 1979 about the anthrax outbreak.
Right.
Why would they cover that up? But that was covered up. The KGB were directly involved in it. So, and you'll see with Okishov's interview, he also believes the KGB were involved. But, they obviously had greater powers of investigation than the prosecutors, the civil prosecutor's office.
Yeah. What convinced you that they didn't move the site?
Well, Valentin Yakovenko, I mean, he's still alive. He knew the Dyatlov group, and he was at the university at the same time as they were, and he actually took over the as chairman of the tourist club the year after they died. So and he's not necessarily kept the memory alive, but he's always been involved with it. When they started giving permits out after 4 years, he was the first up there to, get the memorial raised up there for them. But he's had a close interest, and he looked at the negatives and cleaned them up. These are the original negatives from the cameras, and cleaned them up and examined them with a very powerful microscope. And it seems that last night there was something going on in the night sky. And, what he's done is you can't tell what negatives are from what cameras, because even if there's pictures of, say, I don't know, Luda, one of the girls, you don't know necessarily that it's her camera, because she could have given it to somebody else to have taken a picture of her. So one of the film strips has got Zolotarev scratched into the actual the frames, on top, not on the actual the actual negative itself, but to the edge of it, to show that it belonged to his camera. And he's examined them all, and it seems that they were photographing something going on in the night sky that night. So, which leads me to think that they were on the actual, they'd pitched their tent, they'd eaten something, somebody saw whatever was happening in the sky, these lights and orbs. They're actually, he believes that 3 of the cameras are showing more or less the same things. So you can't say that they all had exactly the same defects. He cleaned the negatives up as best he could, removed any foreign objects. So he's got as clean a negative as he can get. So something seemed to be going on over the mountain that night. But what is it? He believes it's technology based.
Right. So you don't know if all the film was recovered or not.
No, no. What we do know is that some of it's missing. Yakovenko said that himself, that not all the frames are there. When you look in the book, you'll see Lev Ivanov talks a little bit about it. About taking the film back and getting it developed.
Yeah.
But but you could say, well, maybe it was lost, and it's quite possible it was lost. The tent. Nobody knows what happened to the tent. So, it's possible things got lost or misplaced. But equally, you could also say, well, did somebody take them for a particular reason because there's something on the negative that they don't want anybody to see? There's definitely negatives missing. There are frames missing, definitely.
It almost seems like they would have taken more of them if they were going to take them.
Well, there's enough of them, though. Whatever was happening seemed to happen for a limited time, though. I mean, Yakovenko and the Dyatlov Foundation, they actually timed it. If it was, say, some kind of military activity, he believed it was 1.5 to 2 minutes. So it could be that whatever was happening only happened for a very short period of time anyway. But to take the number of pictures that they did, to rewind to wind the spool of film on, and allowing, getting your footing right in the snow and pointing the camera at whatever was in the sky. Each operation would take a certain number of seconds, and he estimated anything between 1.5 to 2.5 minutes for whatever was happening. But whatever was happening happened and probably ended fairly quickly. But it's trying to find out what that was.
Now, taking pictures of anything in the sky at night, even with modern equipment, is pretty difficult. So the fact that they got anything at all is kind of impressive.
Well, yeah, but don't forget that when you look at the actual frames, and I've seen them at the foundation, they're just black. You don't see anything.
Oh, okay.
He examined them with a medium strength microscope to start with, and then with a very powerful microscope, and you can pick it up. And I've put the scans onto into the book, and they're on my website as well. So some of those, one of them in particular looks like some kind of an aircraft or a drone of some kind breaking up. And Yakovenko actually called, there's two of them, he called it plane 1 and plane 2. But there's other negatives there. You can't make head and a tail of them. One of them looks like an explosion.
Yeah.
In the distance. But a couple of the others, it looks like it could be a fuel leak spreading across something. One of them looks like a net. You can't make any sense of it.
So one of the things you do in the book is you completely dismiss the avalanche theory. And you say everyone that went up there with you, I mean, looking at the edge of the slope and everything and the angle of the slope, it doesn't seem like that's even a possibility.
Well, it didn't to us. There's a couple of people who know the area very well, going back to, the time of the tragedy. What people who knew that area well were saying is that there couldn't have been an avalanche because the way the wind blows, and I experienced the wind there, it's a very strong wind, and it takes... the snow doesn't settle near the top. There's a ridge coming out from the mountain where the tent was. They were very close to the top of the ridge. No, I wouldn't even have put it at 300 meters. It looks much closer than that. You can see pictures on my website. I took a picture to the left, to the center, and to the right of where the tent was, and you can see. And there's also people standing in one of the pictures, so you can get an idea of the scale. But what the people, the survivalists up there are saying is that the way the wind blows, the constant wind blows the snow off the top of the mountain and blows it off the ridge, so that you don't have any snow built up there to create an avalanche anyway.
Right.
But all of us, nobody disputed it. We all looked at it and we thought, well, there's no way an avalanche could have happened here.
Now, one of the things you compare this to in the book is some geologists' deaths in 1973.
That's right. Yeah, there was that happened not in the Urals. It was much further over in an extremely remote part of Siberia. They'd been in their tent, and this they didn't slash their way out of the tent. They left the tent in blind panic. Because their bodies were found, they just run, and the body, they died of hypothermia. But the way they exited the tent, apparently they were running. They could see that in the footprints in the snow, and they were running in not circles, but going from side to side, and the way the footprints were, as they were obviously running away from the tent to get away from something. They didn't run together, they split up, which again suggests kind of a blind panic,
right,
rather than going in a group. And that to me really is more a scenario that should have happened with the Dyatlov group. If there was genuine panic to get away from the tent, then you'd expect them to be like a bomb burst sort of effect of somebody going up near the ridge, somebody going to the left, somebody going to the right, somebody or a couple of them running down the hill, but just to get away. You would, if you're not thinking straight or whatever, and it's fight or flight, and it's flight that you choose, you don't say to somebody, look, let's you and I run down this way. You just run, right. Which is what these two geologists had done. And of course, they died of hypothermia, but their deaths are inexplicable as well, because where they were camped was on flat land. It was in a mountainous area, but where they were, there was no avalanche or no threat of an avalanche nearby. Something had terrified them enough to run away. People would the first thing you think of is possibly a bear. But in midwinter, it's very rare to find bears that aren't hibernating. It's extremely rare.
Yeah.
But no answers have been found for what caused them to do that.
You reproduce in here a interview or an article, I guess, with Lev Ivanov.
Yeah. He was he was basically the guy that did all the legwork on the case. He took over from the original prosecutor, Tempelov, from Ivdel. But he was basically a cop or a detective, if you like. They call them prosecutors in Russia, but he had a lot of experience. He also had a lot of experience of deaths in cold weather, so he had plenty of experience to call on.
And his end theory is that these were somehow related to fire orbs, as he calls them.
Yeah, fine. Well, he does also say that he calls them UFOs, but not UFOs in the sense most of us would think, with aliens on board. He said that they were objects in the sky, or fire orbs of some kind.
Yeah, he uses the technical definition, an
He
identified flying
does.
object.
Yeah, he does. He doesn't. But it's strange. He doesn't call them aliens. He calls them UFOs, which implies a technological type of thing in the sky. But he also tries to say it's nothing to do with the military, which is the first step you go to, or the first place you go to, really. But he takes great pains to say it's nothing to do with the military, which seems pretty odd to me. Because
Why?
he's not really well. Because I don't think he's given a satisfactory explanation. The military is the first thing you would think of, but he said no, it's not. It's nothing to do with that. It's just something in the sky. Well, it's to say it's just something in the sky and just saying it's unidentified. You'd think, well, wouldn't you want to contact the military, the civil authorities, check radar? But he doesn't want to do any. He doesn't want to even go down that route of saying, well, bear in mind, he wasn't being interviewed. He was writing this article himself. He was visited by journalists, but they're not questioning him. He's explaining, if you like, what he thinks happened. But he sets a lot of barriers for himself to me. If somebody said to me, there's an unidentified flying object over the group that night, you'd say, well, what do you think it could be? And he's saying it isn't the military. And you say, well, where's your evidence to back that up? Have you spoken to, there's an air base 100 miles away. Has anybody contacted them to see if they had any aircraft or anything in the air? Have you spoken to the army where they conducted an exercise? He doesn't even go down that route. He just says it's nothing to do with them.
Okay. We'll come back to the orbs because there's more stuff there too. But his boss, is it Okashev?
Yeah.
He pushes it more toward a military explanation.
Well, there's a couple of things about it because you get the impression there's two interviews with him, and it's also significant that Lev Ivanov wrote his article 23 years before Okashev gives his interview, and he makes no mention of him, and he's his boss, which I find rather odd. It's his boss, and his boss is still alive at that point, but he doesn't mention him once. But Okashev seems to give a more realistic account, because he talks about nuclear tests being moved up into the Urals from where they were being conducted further south in the Caucasus region. There's a couple of testing areas there. And he says he talked to somebody who wouldn't give too much detail, but implies that the testing areas were moved up to the Urals where they couldn't be so easily observed. So he's bringing in, and the only people who were conducting nuclear tests at that time were the military. They're obviously in conjunction with ICBMs. But so he talks about that. He also then goes on to talk about the arrival of a big, the second most senior guy in the Soviet legal system arrives in Sverdlovsk, and basically takes control of the whole thing and tells them what to say. And he tries, he implies a lot of things, but he tries not to be drawn on it. But I think I think he says enough to make you think that it looks like some kind of cover up. But a cover up of what? That's the problem.
So your belief is that this does have a military explanation, at least to some extent.
To some extent, but I think what every Dyatlov theorist should be doing is looking at his own theory and say, where are the flaws in this? And that's the only way we're going to get to the truth. And there are flaws in it. I know we've got the guy who was Lev Ivanov's boss is more or less implying that there's something here to do with the military, although he doesn't come right out and say it, but he's implying it quite strongly. He's also implying that the whole thing was shut down on orders from Moscow, basically. But you could say, well, if there are explosions involved, and I mean, some of the injuries could have been caused by blasts. My idea is that they were up on the mountain, and things started happening. They saw lights which could have been flares, and Zolotarev had been in the military, so he would have some understanding of what was happening. And then say there was a couple of explosions to start with, and he realized straight away that they'd probably wandered into the middle of a military exercise, and he probably shouted to the others, we need to get away from here as fast as possible, which would explain why they went down to the tree line. Because if you've got blasts, you're going to get more protection if you're in a forest. I'm not saying you're getting total protection, but out in the open, you've got no protection at all. So, there's a kind of a logic there. If he realized that there was approaching danger, if blasts were coming nearer or whatever, his first thought was to get to a place of safety as fast as possible, and not with the idea that despite the cold, they could probably come back once the exercise or the blasts had finished. That's my idea. But the trouble is, with that theory, you could say the nearest Mansi village was probably maybe 20 miles, 25 miles away. If there were blasts, you'd maybe hear the noise of blasts. I mean, there were witnesses in Ivdel, and there was a group of students on the Chistop mountain range, which is not that far away. They saw the lights as well, but nobody mentioned anything about a noise of blasts. So you could say there's a flaw in the theory there. But every theory has a flaw in it.
Yeah, yeah. And wouldn't if it was a bomb or something, wouldn't it leave more evidence?
Well, yeah, possibly. But then you could come into the area of, okay, if there's a bomb, it'll leave fragments. Don't forget that after there was snowfall after they died. So fragments could have been, sort of left scattered around, especially if there were air blasts where you get killed from the pressure. But don't forget, the whole place was closed down. Well, I'm not saying closed down. What happened was nobody was allowed to go up there into that area. You had forestry workers still working within the forest area. You still had Mansi looking after their reindeer and hunting, but they wouldn't give any permits out for 4 years to allow people to go up there. So basically, the area was more or less closed off. If they were still tidying up the area, nobody would go near it anyway because they'd make sure of that. But as you say, you would expect more evidence of a possible blast. If a bomb, say, hit the ground, you'd expect a kind of a crater at the very least.
Or some damage to the surrounding trees and such.
Well, yeah, but where they were, there was, they were a mile away almost from the tree line. That's the thing. They were near the top of the ridge by the mountain. So, it took us going quite fast in the summer, 20 minutes to half an hour to, not even going through snow or whatever, to get down to the tree line. So, if a blasts were happening up on the ridge area, it's a good distance down to the trees to cause any damage. But being exposed where they were, you could imagine, well, the pressure from it might have injured them severely, but they could still make it down to the tree line.
Okay. All right. And only 3 of them were severely injured, right?
Well, yeah, but they all had injuries of some kind. Obviously Zolotarev and not Zina Luda had the worst injuries, but the Kolevatov, who was found with Zolotarev and Luda, who had the worst injuries to their chest, he had a wound behind his ear, his left ear. Tibor had fractures to his skull. Rustem, who was on his way back up, seemingly up the mountain, he had a skull injury as well. So there was several injuries to a few of them. But you see, again, you come back to the autopsy report. Is the autopsy report giving the genuine injuries? If all of them had been affected by blasts, or they all had bones damaged or whatever, internal injuries, you could say, well, it's obvious there's some kind of a blast. But if you say only half of them died of hypothermia and half died of car crash type injuries, then you think, well, what the hell's going? What could have done both those things? It's mixing it all up. The guy, the pathologist, even says in his interview with Lev Ivanov at the end that the injuries were similar to that could have been caused by a blast. But then the interview is terminated very shortly after that with Lev Ivanov.
Okay. And this is one of the things you suppose probably happened, that these autopsy reports are not the real autopsies, basically.
Well, they probably are real, but it's in parts. To me, it's mixing lies with the truth. And again, I keep coming back to this anthrax outbreak in 1979 in the city funnily enough, that they set out from. There was a military biological warfare plant there, and anthrax spores were released into the atmosphere. What the people who died, there was nearly 100 people died. They said that they died from inhaling these spores. What the KGB did was confiscate all the medical records and had them reissued to say that they had died from eating contaminated meat, which was not the truth, basically. But so, yes, they died of anthrax, but no, they didn't die from a biological warfare experiment, is what the autopsies are saying. But the autopsies aren't telling the truth.
Right, right.
And I just wonder if if there's a deliberate mixing up of the truth with, how should we say, not truth in the autopsies. Because if you say they all died of hypothermia, you sort of think, well, how the hell did they let themselves get into that position where they all died of hypothermia? If they all died of terrible internal injuries, blast injuries, or whatever, you think, well, that obviously leads you towards a blast of some kind, and the only people that would be capable of doing that are the military. But if you mix it all up, you just cannot get a right answer.
But by doing that, aren't you just inviting more questions?
Well, but isn't that what it would be intended in a cover up, if that's what you were doing? You don't you present too much evidence and you've got your man. If you don't present enough evidence, or you present half of the wrong evidence, you'll never get your man. That's my take on it. And I could be wrong. I don't mind admitting that. But it just doesn't seem right to me that you've got two sets of basically conflicting evidence, because it just doesn't make sense. But I don't think it's meant to make sense.
Now, you also show that there could be a fake case file in this mix, too.
Well, that's one of the biggest, one of the biggest mysteries of the whole thing, is the original case file. But Okushev, in his interview, says when Yurakov, the big boy from Moscow, arrives, he takes control of the whole thing and says, "You're to write a report, finish it today, and tell everybody it was an accident." And he takes the case file with him back to Moscow. So You can see then, well, why would he do that? And Okishev says in his interview that that's the only time in his whole career that anybody ever arrived from Moscow and took a case file away. So you've got to say, why did he take the case file away, and what happened to it after that? Which because until I read that interview with him, there was talk that there was a file in Sverdlovsk in the archives, and that there's another real one somewhere else. That could still be the case, but it's obvious. I mean, we have it from the words of one of the senior investigators that the file was taken away to Moscow.
And the current one doesn't have a case number on it.
No, that's what everybody points to. That's why everybody says that there's no case number on it. And in the interview, Okishov, he has an interview with another, a younger. Well, I mean, I say a younger man. I mean, Okishov's in his 90s now. He has an interview with Leonid Proshkin, who's been a respected investigator for many years, and he actually mentions the fact that there is no case number on the file. And he also points out that in the records, he said there's all the radio telegrams that were sent between the mountain and, the base camp at Ivdel and down to Sverdlovsk, because they'd set a room up at the university as a kind of coordination center. They said there are between 10 and 12 messages every day, and they're all missing for one day, and that day was the day that a flyer flew over near the mountain and saw the tent there the day before it was discovered. And he said, why do you think that is? To Okishov, he says, why do you think there's 10 or 12 messages every day, and then for that day there's none? And he says he can't answer it.
Now, the radiation results, what about those? Are those potentially faked, or?
Well, no. Well, the radiation is peculiar. No, I don't think they are faked. And I think the radiation has got some kind of something to do with it, because Lev Ivanov implies he was the one who asked for the test to take place. And he wouldn't have done that. He wasn't senior enough to do it. But he was instructed to do it. An instruction came from Moscow, basically, to conduct radiation tests. But this was on the final four bodies, and they took a sample of soil from where the final four bodies were found. So I don't think they're faked at all, the radiation tests that were done. But what is odd about it is the first five bodies had already been buried at this point. So why not exhume them and conduct radiation tests on them? The whole radiation thing is peculiar because it's focused on the bodies and a piece of soil taken from underneath Kolovatov. Why not check the whole area for radiation? You could say, well, maybe it's another red herring, which is possible, but again, when you're talking about radiation, you imply there's something going on with the military. And then there's also the colors of the body, the skin. Some people say that the colors of the skin on the bodies when they were buried, they're saying that's down to mummification and UV rays from the sun. But Okishov says in his interview that Lev Ivanov had a lot of experience of dealing with bodies found out in the open who'd died of hypothermia, whatever, and none of them, but both of them remarked on the strange colouring of the bodies. And as I say, Ivanov knew what he was talking about. He'd never seen anything like it before, and he had a lot of experience of dealing with dead bodies with hypothermia.
Okay, so let's look at these orbs and lights a little more. This whole area, I mean, people have had experiences with orbs of light, UFO type phenomena. It's not uncommon up there.
No, it's not. No, it's very common. I say very common, but it wasn't just seen by one person. There's plenty of witnesses. There's military witnesses, Mansi have seen them. There's people in Ivdel have seen them. So there's plenty of people who'd seen the lights. There was members of the search party had seen lights as well, or orbs. And there's no explanation for them. There's none forthcoming either.
Well, I mean, you get the same type of things like the things in like the Brown Mountain lights here in the U.S. or the Marfa lights, where you have these what seem to be plasma uh, lights showing up and actually sort of behaving with what seems like intelligence in the fact that they will move away from you if you chase them or move towards you if you don't. I would think that might be some of the same thing happening over there.
Well, it's possible. None of us, nobody's ever come up with a satisfactory explanation for them, but they were there. I mean, if you look at the if you like, the famous negative of what looks like an orb coming down, people have. There's been all sorts of explanations for that. Some people can see a face in it. There's talks of demons. It could also be a flare. You fire a flare, it explodes and lights up, and then it starts dropping. It could be that, but there's no single satisfactory explanation for any of the lights. But people keep talking about the lights up there. I mentioned in my first book, Yuri Yakimov. I met him when I was over there, and I interviewed him. And he a lot of people have said, "Oh, what a load of nonsense!" But he struck me as a very down-to-earth, sensible man. And he found a forest ranger who'd been exposed to the same lights. Well, what he said to me was that he was on his own in the mine that he was working on. It was an open mine area. But he said when the lights came on, he said they started coming towards him. I said, well, what was it like? Well, he said it was like a group of people were running towards him holding flashlights in their hands. But he said they weren't ordinary flashlights. He said they were so powerful that the beams were going right through the trees, very, very powerful lights, and that they were expanding. He said it was like as if a group of people were in a line, and as they started coming towards them, they started spreading out. It's like the number of lights was expanding. He said he hid, and he just waited until the light, because he could see the lights over the top of where he was hiding behind a machine in the actual mine itself. And he said the lights just stayed there for some time, and eventually they disappeared. They went off, and there was a kind of an electrical type noise, like a bang, when they went off. And exactly the same thing happened to a forest ranger up there when he tracked him down to speak to him about it, and he had exactly the same experience with them. And the forest ranger, as I say in many interviews, was a guy who lived in the forest virtually his whole life, tending his area of the forest, and used to dealing with bears and wolves. He had a rifle with him, but he was frightened as well. But he said the overwhelming feeling he had was one of fear.
And that's not totally uncommon from other sightings around the world of this type of stuff. Are there any environmental factors that are unusual about this area?
Well, it's the Mansi live up there. The tribe. There's a lot. They have a lot of legends. I mean, that's my next area of research. Is to I'm in touch with a Hungarian professor who lived amongst the Mansi for a while, and I want to try and put together the Mansi legends. But there's also the legend of the Golden Woman up there, Zolotaya Baba, who supposedly had a lair near Mount O'Torton, which was their final destination. Say final destination. They were going to Mount O'Torton, and they were going to turn around and come back. But so there's all sorts of legends, paranormal type legends, if you like, connected with the area. There is talk of energy based possible, not what's the word, experiences of something up there, but nobody can explain it, but it's explained through the Mansi, I think, as they've lived in the area for hundreds of years. But a lot of people might say, well, that's just a legend. you can't prove anything. But the trouble with this whole story is nobody can prove anything.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to be able to come up with one theory that joins all the dots up. I've had people contact me on my website and say, no, you talk a load of nonsense. Obviously, the Mansi killed them, and you think, well, okay, but where's your evidence for that?
Yeah. Yeah, you dismissed that along with the avalanche theory because there's really no evidence the Mansi had anything to do with this.
Well, I'll tell you another thing why I dismiss the Mansi theory of killing them is that you'll read in the book when Okushev starts talking about the whole thing. The first thing he did was to go up to Ivdel, and he stayed in a hotel and he booked a room for one of the Mansi elders to come down and see him. The guy, he was one of the representatives of the Mansi, and he came down and Okushev interviewed him, and he said that the mountain, there's talk of there was females on the mountain, it was sacred to them, but this guy says to him the mountain isn't sacred to us at all, and he said any Russians coming up here are our guests, and since it happened, no, I've never read or heard of anything about the Mansi just keep to themselves. They don't trouble anybody. But Okushev sort of interviews him and sort of says, well, this guy seems to be telling the truth. He obviously speaks for the tribe. But he dismisses it, and so does Lev Ivanov. But I wonder if one of the reasons why they dismiss the Mansi being involved in any way is because they already know what happened. They might say, well, we know that the military involved in this, so we're not going to go blaming the Mansi when they had nothing to do with it. That's just my take on it. But I mean, the Mansi, one of the head men came up to see us at the campsite when we were at the base of the mountain, brought his wife up, and, full of good cheer and asking if everything was all right, did we need anything? And when I was being taken back by these two hunters, we were driving back through the forest and we ran into, a few Mansi there. There was a couple hunting, there was a couple of females, all quite pleasant. They don't. They look as if they just don't want to be bothered. I don't mean it in a rude way, but they're quite happy for people to pass through and all the rest of it, and they don't want any trouble. That was the impression I got of them, anyway.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be possible if these orbs are electromagnetic or such plasma in nature that one of them could have come close to them and that exploded or hit them, causing some of the injuries?
That's more than possible, and that's a road I want to take. I want to look into that because, if you can't explain it any other way rationally, then you have to look at paranormal explanations. People might say, well, there's talk of the Yeti being involved and all that. And I know there's a lot of people who are quite strong on the Yeti theory. My view is, well, prove it to me and I'll go along with it. But as I said in a recent interview, I was told, or we were all told, to stay away from the north of the camp because there was a giant bear there, barely a couple of 100 feet away. A massive bear, and with probably another one not far away as well. And you think in the 10 days, those two bears didn't move away, but two people had seen them, but the rest of us didn't see them at all. So, to say there's no Yeti anywhere in the whole of Russia, if you look at a map of Russia, say from where we were up at Ivdel, you draw a line across to the top of the Kamchatka Peninsula, you could probably walk that if you could and not meet a single person in nearly 3,000 miles. So, it's a very remote area.
Well, the problem there is there's no real evidence, and
I agree with you. I agree with you. But the trouble is the evidence that we are coming up with for a lot of the other theories is just nothing to back it up.
Yeah.
To me it's only part evidence. I could say, well, yeah, the military, a plane took off from that, a MiG-19 or MiG-17 took off from that air base, dropped a bomb by accident over where they were, killed, or not killed, but seriously injured a few of them. They dragged them, or not dragged, but they all made their way down in case it was going to happen again. That could have happened, but I've got nothing. Again, it's just a theory. It's just a theory that the Mansi came along and killed them all. It's just a theory that escaped prisoners, went up there and killed them. There's nothing that actually backs it all up. Well, any of them.
It seems like the military explanation has at least something behind it.
It seems to, and that's the one I plump for. The thing is, everybody has their favourite theory. I mean, this is how I came onto it in the first place, because I've researched the Soviet military for many, many years, and so you tend to go with your favourite theory, if you like. You can talk to. I met a survivalist, not survivalist in the American sense, but a survival expert. Sorry. In Lithuania, who told me he'd been involved in hit by an avalanche and survived it, but he's absolutely convinced it was an avalanche. So you've got each person who has their area of expertise will tell you, that there's no argument. All I need to do is prove it. It was definitely this. A Yeti theorist will tell you that a Yeti definitely did it, but I can't prove it. But every single one of us can say that. That there's the infrasound theory. But again, it's a possibility, but again, you can't prove it. I mean, many people have been. I spent the night up there. There was a strong wind, but none of us got affected by it. There's loads of people going up there every year now, and I've never heard of anybody being affected by infrasound up there.
And the thing with the infrasound is it doesn't really explain the injuries or some of the other things that happened that we can see from what we do know happened.
What everybody tends to do, though, if they come up with a theory like that, is for the worst of the injuries, they say that they either fell into that ravine, which they wouldn't have done because it would have been covered in snow, which is how they got the injuries, or they were in there and gradually the snow building up caused the injuries. One of the females, Luda, her nose was almost smashed into her face, but the pressure of snow, I wouldn't have thought would have done that on a rock. It might have done. It doesn't really explain it. How would snow cause an injury behind the left ear of Kolevatov?
Yeah.
It just doesn't explain it properly.
And by the same token, it doesn't explain like a Yeti attack because it doesn't look like an animal attack of any kind.
No, I mean, again, with an animal attack, even if it had been a rogue bear, it would have torn limbs off and they'd have been partially eaten, and there'd be tracks as well. For them to have left the tent where it was would imply that the animal was up there or very close to it. If it'd been a bear, if their tracks were there would have been bear tracks chasing them down the hill probably. But that's what I'm saying. There's so many missing pieces of the jigsaw that none of the theories really explain it.
Yeah.
And if somebody can back up something, with some plasma effect or whatever, I'm completely open to any new theory coming along. I had a theory given to me yesterday and I'll mention his name, Mick Taylor from Plymouth here in England. He contacted me to say, has anybody ever considered that the guy who was complaining about his wallet being stolen at Serov railway station, there was a guy there complaining that one of them had stolen his wallet. Did he gather a group of his friends together, follow them up there, and dished out their revenge?
Right.
Again, it's another theory, and not implausible. I would imagine somebody having his wallet stolen and by a bunch of college kids all the rest of it might have enraged him, but again, there's no proof of it.
Yeah, yeah. I like the fact that you take this with such an open mind, because I feel like until we can say definitively, anything's possible.
It is. Anything is possible. All of what I've done in the new book, though, is I felt that with the work that Yakovenko did with the negatives, you can dismiss all that if you want. You could say, well, what was it? Maybe he didn't clean the negatives properly or whatever. But he's a very thorough man, and he spent a lot of time on it. But his view is that something was going on in the night sky that attracted their attention, and that doesn't mean to say that whatever it was happening up in the sky caused their deaths. But it's very strange that there's two things happening here. They were up on the mountain, something's going on in the sky, and then they're all dead. Later on. So it's a bit of a smoking gun type of theory, but it shows that there's something there. He believes it's technology based, but even if you ignore that, what Okushov says in his interview points in a particular direction that the authorities haven't given the full details of what happened. Why in his whole career, nobody had ever arrived from Moscow to take charge of a case. And he says that also, when you read the book, he says that Yurikov had no interest in how the case was or what they'd uncovered, as if everything was already clear to him. And then he tells them to close the case before he leaves and say it was an accident, and off he goes with all the files.
Yeah. And the military explanation, the thing about that is we know this type of thing happens. We know that it's a distinct possibility and could explain a lot of what we're seeing there, except maybe for the calm movement, unless they were worried they were going to be in danger and weren't actually in danger yet and said, okay, everyone, single fire, let's hurry down to the tree line, rather than doing it in a blind panic. But it still doesn't explain why they would have cut their way out of the tent rather than just going out the main door.
Well, it could be. No, but I go along exactly with what you're saying there. It could be, though. Say there was one blast that was some distance away. Other than the sound of the wind, and they're taking pictures, the blast might have come out of nowhere. And Zolotarev, being an ex-military guy, realized straight away what it was and said to the others, we've got to get out of here. If they're in the tent, they hear a blast, you think, God almighty, what's that? And you start going into panic mode. They get out of the tent, the first blast has happened, and they're standing there thinking, what the hell's going on? And then maybe another one a bit further away or slightly nearer, and they realize straight away that they're in serious danger, that the blast might be coming near. Because if it's an exercise, it's not just going to be one explosion, it'll probably be several.
Yeah.
So they then start thinking, well, it's a good bit away, but let's walk down to the trees where we're going to be safe, and then we'll come back up.
Right.
That's my feeling on it. But again, conjecture.
And when you get to fire orbs, we can see that these things exist. People have witnessed ball lightning. We've seen, like I said, the Marfa lights. You can go out there to Marfa, Texas, and see them almost any time, and we still can't explain them.
No.
But at the same time, we don't have any evidence that they've ever hit anyone and caused this kind of damage.
Well, no. But the thing is, it's a remote area. These things might, what I'm saying about Siberia, it's such a remote area, anything can happen up there, and nobody can witness it necessarily. People might say, well, why doesn't it happen in cities? Well, there might be some explanation as to why it doesn't happen in cities, but maybe this type of phenomena develops in an uninhabited area. Something to do with the climate. It could be anything. There's to me, there's something going on in the night sky that's connected with what happened to them, but whatever it is, I don't know. That's the problem.
And you think that Luda's tongue being cut out was actually a red herring on this one?
Well, I believe it was. It's like this sort of thing. Well, how can we really mix this up? They don't say her tongue was cut out. They say it's missing. But then when you see her, the picture of her, I mean, I've stood at that rock that she was found on. The water's flowing quite strongly over it. So you've got your face in running water for what? I mean, I don't know when it started thawing, but maybe her face has been in the water for at least a couple of weeks. She's been dead for, by that point, by about for at least a month or more. So she's not going to be in that great a shape anyway, despite the cold. But as the thaw happens, the tongue could have been eaten away by microorganisms if it did disappear, or the tongue might have been there all along. It's to me, it's a massive red herring though, because everybody talks about it,
Right.
and maybe that's what's intended.
Why wouldn't, if it was the military, why wouldn't they have just disposed of the bodies?
Well, but you've got a group of 9 upstanding, upright citizens, the cream of communism, if you like. They reckoned that Zena was going to go on to great things in, the Communist Party. They were all highly intelligent. You had 2 people who worked in nuclear facilities. You had a war hero, Zolotarev, had won 4 medals, and he'd fought at Stalingrad. To just dispose of their bodies, probably, somebody would have had to take charge and say, right, just throw them. The thing is, the ground was rock hard anyway, so you wouldn't have been able to just bury them. But there must have been some sense of, we've mucked up here. Possibly after an exercise, somebody flew over the area or went up there and saw saw the tent, guessed what had happened, found the bodies, and thought, we've really screwed up here. How do we correct this? Maybe there was some sense of what sort of propriety in that they thought, well, we've killed them. It's been a terrible accident. How can we, make the best of this that we can? We don't want to just dispose of their bodies out of a sense of decency, but equally, we don't want to take the blame.
Right.
Again, I'm just talking generally here, thinking how it might have gone. It's.
What do you think that this information, the answer to this, still might, if it was the government, do you think it still exists in their files somewhere, or has it just been lost, or will they just never release it?
I think it does exist, and I think there's people who know exactly what happened, but people who were alive then, who were, Okishov, he's in his 90s now. He was 93 when he did the interview 3 years ago. I gather he's still alive, but he's 96. I doubt that he's going to be here with us a hell of a lot longer. So all the people who were alive then are, now moving on to meet their maker. And once the people that were alive at the time are gone, you're only left with paperwork. And after the anthrax incident, all the files were ordered to be destroyed in 1992, I think it was, by the Council of Ministers. All paperwork relating to it was ordered to be destroyed. So it could be that there is paperwork, and I believe there is, and it's just been disposed of.
So it'll probably we'll probably never know for sure in that case.
Well, the only other place that would have it is in the files, the archives of the FSB. The KGB. They must have a take on it. They keep saying, "Oh, we had nothing to do with this," but when you think that 2 of them worked in secret nuclear facilities, I cannot believe that the KGB would not have taken an interest in it. And even Okishov himself says that he's almost certain that they were involved. But you see, they run a standalone operation, and they're their own bosses basically. They do what they like. So they'd run an investigation. They wouldn't be answerable to anybody other than the Communist Party of the big bosses in Moscow, through whoever was running the KGB at the time. But I'm pretty sure that there's probably something in their files, but nobody believes that they haven't got something on it. Right. But whether or not you're going to access those files is debatable.
All right. So the new book is called Journey to Dyatlov Pas, An Explanation of the Mystery. And people can get this where?
On Amazon. It's published through Amazon.
Okay. And you have two websites.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have my general authors website, which has all my books on it, and I have one dedicated to the Dyatlov incident. And I've just done more updates on it with more theories. I've got photographs of my trip up there as well, which people might be interested in because I've got photos of each location where the bodies were found. I've put a picture of the body when it was found and the location as it is today, or as it was in 2015. And pictures of the trip up there, the people that were on the expedition. I've got pictures of where the tent location was. So, even if you're just got a passing interest, you might like to have a look at it.
And that is Dyatlov-Pas-Incident.com.
That's it. Yeah.
And it's Dyatlov for anyone who doesn't know. And your general website is KeithMcCloskey.com, and that's McCloskey.
OSKEY.
All right. Yeah. And what's next? Is are you going to be doing another book on Dyatlov Pass next?
Well, the thing is, it's only any good in doing another book if you can find more evidence. But
right.
We need evidence to move it forward. Otherwise, you're just repeating what everybody, the other book. There's a few books on it now. Mine was the first right. Outside Russia when it was released, but there's quite a few books now. But I think it needs more evidence, before anybody can write another book on it. That's my view.
So what do you have in the plans then?
Well, I'm looking at the Kinross incident at the moment. I'm hoping to bring a book out on that. There's a couple of aviation mysteries, but the centerpiece of it is the Kinross incident.
Which is what?
Well, it's the disappearance of a fighter that took off from an air base over Lake Superior. It was meant to be tracking an unidentified flying object, but by that I mean it in the sense that Lev Ivanov was told it's being tracked on radar. It shows the fighter merging with the object, and then the object continues, and the fighter has disappeared, and neither the aircraft nor the crew have been found or seen ever since in 1953.
Yeah, I vaguely remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because had they crashed into Lake Superior, there would have been wreckage, but no wreckage has ever been found of it. There's not a trace of it ever been found. So, I've only just started researching it, so and I've got a few takes on that as well.
There's a few cases like that. There's one down in Australia, and I forget the guy's name.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. There's over the Tasman Sea. What they're saying on this Kinross incident is that it was a Royal Canadian Air Force Dakota that landed. When that landed, they said that they didn't see or hear anything, and there was certainly, but the two blips were seen to merge on the radar at the same height, and yet they didn't see anything. So a lot of people are discounting that. But the point is, nobody knows what happened.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that. That should be very, very interesting to read.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you for spending some time with us, Keith.
Thank you, sir. I thank you for having me on.